Welcome to Brands on Tap, the podcast where we discuss all things brand related.
So whether you're a business owner, industry expert, or simply interested, this podcast is for you.
Hi guys, and welcome back. This week we're going to be talking about design with purpose, so the fundamentals of web design, and that involves basically the strategy involved in how we'd go about doing the web design, why web design is important, and some of the aspects and elements to consider when doing web design. So yeah, that's what we're going to cover this week.
Yeah, because I guess, visually, we're quite a visual kind of species anyway, aren't we? So getting the fundamentals right. If every website had the same fonts, same colours, same sort of layout, then it'd be quite a boring world, and ultimately, I guess your business wouldn't stand out.
No, that's right, absolutely. I think there's sort of an understated element to web design nowadays, with, as we discussed, with lots of other elements of design where people don't see it as quite as important probably as they should do, and they forget that it's really the shop window of your brand, so it can often be the first point of contact that your customers or your viewers have.
Well, it could be the only
or the only
port of call for your customers. So
absolutely,
yeah.
So I think, it's a really great opportunity to get across your brand styles, as you say, your tone of voice, look and feel, show rich imagery, and just break away from the mold that is kind of social media and all the other platforms that are available out there that have these kind of constraints and sort of repetitive patterns to them of how you engage with them and how you use them. Still today, kind of like your website's really the only way you can break away from that and do something a bit different that reflects your brand, and allows you to kind of show your audience and show people viewing your site a little bit about what makes your brand tick and kind of what is unique about your brand. Yeah.
But I guess recently we've seen the erosion of that though, with templated systems and the like. So, this is where like having a unique looking website, to stand out in that crowd, because in essence, if your competitors, if they're all using templated systems, using similar fonts, same sort of colours, even a style of imagery might be roughly the same, or even using the same image that we've seen numerous times, then your business, if you purposely make your website look, overtly different to your competitors,
Absolutely.
And obviously, you're setting your stall out to look like, hey guys, I am different from the others, and your site might be more visually engaging, might be easier for people to use your website, which we'll come on to later, but ultimately it's going to look a lot better and work much harder for your business than using a templated system that might be very similar or the same as somebody else's.
Yeah, that's very good points. Obviously, today's podcast is going to be focusing on the design aspect, but as we've spoken about before and we've covered in the past, there's obviously multiple elements to any form of design, any branding, a brochure, website, anything. There's the strategy element is key, I think, in making the design element successful. And I think, like you said, with templating and with people that aren't sort of aware of design or trained in design, good copywriters, aware of imagery, I think all those little kind of pieces in terms of the final output contribute to how well that works and how effective that is. And I think that the trouble, the pitfall you fall down with templated systems is that you are less inclined to kind of question where things go and how things look because it's been set out for you. And I think that's the difference, is making sure that the design process comes at the right point. So we've done the strategy, we've done the content, we've done the UX, which is the structure, the wireframing, if you like. So what the content needs to be in what order, why does it need to be in that order, how are people going to digest it? Similarly to how you would do on a poster or a magazine or a publication, you wouldn't put all the most important bits right at the end of the magazine or halfway through it. You'd stagger it so that
unless the important bit was the call to action.
Well, I meant sort of more like a story example. So I suppose a call to action could be an element in there, but more like the content, the story, the bit people are buying the magazine for. If that was hidden somewhere, in amongst it, you'd have to trawl through all the earlier bits which are less engaging and find that at some point during that process. So I
Yeah.
think it's that same process you need to go through with the websites. What's the most important thing we need to tell someone? What do they need to find? What do they need to do? And then underneath that, what's the second most important thing? Is there a message you want to get through to them? Is there a really important thing about your brand that you want to make people aware of? And I think that all those processes and all those strategies help towards that design element that we're talking about today with the web design.
That's right.
And enable you to be able to do that with purpose.
Yeah.
As opposed to, like you say, just templating systems which haven't really had that thought process.
No, I mean, we spend a lot of time with our clients doing what we call discovery sessions. And that is basically the crux of, how we kind of start the process with web design, is really not only just the fundamentals of finding out about specifics for what the website needs to achieve, but also from a business perspective. What is your aims for your business? What is your target audience? What's your tone of voice?
Yeah.
What's the sales cycle within your business? Even down to if you're selling products, is what are the margins on certain products? Which is your hero products? Which are the ones that you want to push forward? Mm-hmm. It's finding out all that kind of information up front, which can take a while. And, we structure our discovery sessions so that, we have it's almost like a Q&A session where we're asking these deep diving questions with the aim to ultimately, producing a more effective website that is not only visually appealing, but, makes it more navigable, and ultimately has some form of call to action. So whether you're looking for, more inquiries or selling more products or both, selling services, whatever it might be. But the deep dive discovery bit, we spend a fair amount of time on that element, and it may take you, a day's worth of work to kind of deep dive into that.
Yeah.
And also it's a good way for, especially if you're an agency like ours, talking to the client, it's a good way for them to think more about their business as well. What are the most important things that I need to get across for my business? What are the, biggest selling products? What could I make more margin on? Could I package things together? It gets them sort of thinking more about their business from a holistic perspective, and with all the granular elements underneath.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There's a lot of quality that we can kind of get from that discovery session, which you've done with a lot of clients, depending on the size of the business, but it really helps set the kind of bar for the rest of the processes and the things that follow. And also things like, obviously we're not talking about copywriting and that today, so don't want to go too much into that, but the UX side, which we will cover a bit later on in the podcast, would really benefit from having those answers, which is something we do quite a lot with clients now, having those answers to then allow us to structure kind of the most important elements of the website and pull out of those answers copy and key points about what makes someone different, what makes them stand out, why should somebody buy their service or product over someone else. Using those really important elements of the questionnaire really helps us to kind of forge a structure for the site, if you like, just before that design phase, which then allows us to help the client to write more concise copy, I would say. Because too often we say to a client, can you write copy? Well, no, not really, but I know what I do, so I can provide you copy. Okay, well, if you provide us all the copy, we'll work to that. And then usually you either get a massive page of just waffle, and it's so much that you can't really understand in there what you're trying to actually say, what the key message is, or it's so concise that it's not enough to use to actually get anything of any quality out of it. So I think that's where these questionnaires, a discovery phase, gives us a chance to talk to clients, find those elements, and then put them into the UX element, which then leads on to the design, and that design is then much better for it. So we're able to kind of refine that last process to be much more focused on, a very strong headline, some sort of cut down, very succinct text, like a lead text, as it's called, LEDE, which is like the opening paragraph, and then a call to action. So it's much more effective overall.
Yeah.
as opposed to kind of going back and forth or us saying, well, who wants to write the copy? Well, I don't really write copy much. Okay, so shall we do it? But we obviously know how to write copy to sell, and we know how to write it to be SEO focused. But what we don't know is we're not an expert in that business.
No.
So it's understanding from the person that is the expert, the client or the representative, what it is we need to say and how we can say it. And I think that questionnaire process really helps with that.
Exactly that. And also, I mean, you touched on it earlier, it's also working out the hierarchy of information. So obviously the key bits of information that you really crucially need to get across to your customer right from the get-go. Imagine if it's like a single page advert, for instance. You know, you need to make sure that the headline was attention grabbing and the supporting body text or subheading and then body text relayed all the information, crucially what you wanted that end user to know right from the get-go.
Yeah.
So having, you know, the UX and the content in terms of copy structured in the correct way in order to deliver that information in the right way in a hierarchical order is really important. And by doing, as you say, the UX process, so before we start, you know, putting pen to paper and start designing, you know, we're already looking at the structure and how that content needs to be delivered.
100%. Yeah. Obviously, in the sense of the first element being us talking about why web design still matters, I think we've covered pretty much all of that now. And we've mentioned all the elements of why it still matters, with the added benefit, I think, from a marketing point of view. So we're obviously from our marketing department, the girls would like to be able to see as accurate metrics as possible and as granular metrics as possible. And obviously where we've got social media, we've got ads, we've got other platforms that we're reliant on, it's fine and you can see what they give you. But with a website, again, you've got that kind of ability to track kind of as much or as little as you want, and it's much more flexible.
Yeah.
So that's the other benefit to a website from our point of view with clients, is we can give them those metrics and we have these systems in place where we can, you know, get very granular with what's happening, what people are engaging with, who's clicking on what.
Yep.
And I think that's obviously crucial if you're looking for a marketing report, or you're looking for how successful something is, how effective a campaign or a message is or an image is in your website. You need that granularity.
Yeah.
And that's another real benefit still today with having your own website, is the ability to have the granularity to track.
Yeah.
Alongside, you know, that design element. So how people are engaging with the site, what people are looking at, really affects the overall way we would design it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to consider in 2025, when obviously people are kind of doing a lot of different processes to kind of sell their business. Websites are kind of questioned more now, and they become less valuable to people, and the design process, like you've said, gets overlooked, and people just think a template is sufficient. They don't really consider how the brand looks from the recipient or the value that brand's got.
Yeah.
And I think the website can carry a lot more value than people let it quite often.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's another thing that we won't really touch on in any great depth here today, but because it's not really a design consideration as such, but there's, you know, SEO, search engine optimization as well. So, you know, in terms of the UX and making sure that it's structured in a way that if you do want to highlight specific products, let's say if we're talking about marketing, and you want to drive traffic to a specific product, let's say, it'd be far better to structure the website so that product had its own page. So then you can drive traffic to that. Otherwise, it's going to be landing on, you know, a page that might just be for all your products, which then isn't SEO specific. So yeah, just, you know, being mindful of that when you're creating the UX side of things. Ensuring that from a marketing perspective that SEO has been thought about.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously SEO, like you say, SEO's more on an analytical level, more content level, but there is an element of design that would complement what happens. You know, if your page is optimized and you've SEO'd it to the max and it's really well keyword optimized, when someone lands on it, the web design is still going to have a huge impact on how they engage with that content and how it's digested, because what you don't want is just a page full of copy, and it's very disengaging for somebody that's landing on it. So there's always going to be that kind of yin yang of copy, content, quality, and design. So you've got to have that balance. And obviously, again, we'll touch on sort of accessibility element of that as well. But where you've got a platform like a website and you've got people accessing it with different abilities, different disabilities, different requirements, you've got to consider that one flat design that perhaps you would have done for a print element on a website where you've got fluctuating screen sizes, you've got different devices, you've got people engaging with it in different ways. You've got to consider the design element to also be accessible to some extent. So the colors have to be considered, the sizing has to be considered, the flow has to be considered, and the order of information that you put on the website, even if you visually change it, needs to be correct for that person to fully appreciate and engage with it. So although it's perhaps, say if you're visually impaired or your site's not as good as somebody else's, you're not
like
going to
mine, you mean?
Like yours, yeah. So it's perfect for a designer.
You're not seeing my white stick down by the side here.
No, Paul just closes his eyes and does all sorts of designs. Yeah, usually they're all right actually. And essentially that's something you need to consider, because although it's not, aesthetically what people assume as design, it's still really important because that design is affecting that person's involvement and engagement with the website.
Absolutely.
Even if they've got issues, so you've got to consider the issues that somebody might have and make sure the website and the content is as engageable as possible for everybody.
I mean, we tend to design sort of mobile first these days. But you've got to again look at your target audience as well in terms of design, because if you're a science-led business where people need to digest a lot of information and are used to seeing things at work, let's say, and less so at home, so it's less of a consumer product, it might be a B2B type business, they might 90% of their time be looking at your website on a desktop machine with a much larger screen. So understanding your target audience is really important. So not to say that obviously that website then wouldn't need to be mobile friendly. Of course it would. But you'd need to make sure that on a desktop machine, more so than on a mobile, that aesthetically and the order of information and the amount of information being delivered to that end user, was optimum for that target audience. Yeah,
that's right. It's considering all bases. Somebody might be out and about and someone might say, check out this website. Have you seen this company? You don't know the scenario, so they might just bring up their phone, have a look. And obviously if the website looks awful on a mobile, they're much less likely to go home and probably check it out again on a desktop, because they think, well, it looks pretty bad when I looked it up on my phone. I don't really want to go and look at it again. Whereas if at least you've maintained that professionalism and you've shown someone that you've cared enough to make it look good on a mobile, they'll think, oh, this has been done really well. I'll go home and have a look at it on a desktop, or I'll look at it again. It's that initial first impression. You don't know where someone's going to engage with it. And, we've seen from analytics, a lot of people are on mobiles now and they're using mobiles first. Even if they then go to a desktop afterwards, you've got to consider that journey of, is that the only place people are going to engage?
I mean, I do that with booking holidays and things. I might have a quick search to see, roughly hotels or something like that, or some travel advice. But then I want to see, the images much bigger and things like that. Look at the gallery and
100%.
Check out the hotel. And
if you found a fancy hotel and you're on your phone and it looked awful and you think, well, then immediately you're going to judge and think, well, they haven't sorted their mobile side of it out. It doesn't look very good. What else haven't they sorted out? Have they, what are they like as a brand? What's the hotel quality like? Are they clean? You start questioning everything, thinking, why have they not considered me? And the chances are, you could read into that too much and the hotel's great and they just haven't considered the mobile side of the website. But the amount of people they're going to lose from that impression, it's significant. And I think some people don't consider that.
No, they don't.
And when they come to us and say, I just want to see the visual side, I just want to see the design, in the sense of us talking now about the core principles of web design, it's like kind of somebody asking you for, I'm looking to build a house, I'm really excited about it, I really want to build a house, but I want to see what my lounge is going to look like because it's visual and I've got really good ideas. I love these colours, I love this type of sofa. and we're still there with, you know, a plot of land, and we haven't even started to actually put the structure up yet, let alone work out how big the lounge needs to be and where it's going to sit. And I think it's exactly the same principle for us when we talk about the discovery phase and the processes to the design. We need to have that structure, that skeleton in place for the website, that foundation to build upon, to then make that design just complement everything that's there already and enhance it. But too many clients have a preconceived idea, or general business owners that don't know enough about, you know, design and web design will just think, oh, I just want to see a visual, I just want to see something that looks aesthetic, I want to get really excited about it. And of course that's the bit that's fun for us, but it's only going to be really effective when we've considered all the strategy behind why it's like it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's exactly like I say, it's exactly comparable to something like a house. You know, you wouldn't just knock something up because you've got an idea of what your lounge should look like. You're going to put the whole structure together. You're going to do the blueprints. You're going to get the planning permission. You're going to have builders in to make it sound and make it structurally sound. So it's, you've got to have all that structure in place.
Plus you're going to have the consultation phase of what do you want,
what's
you know,
your budget?
why do you want these, you know, all those kind of considerations.
Exactly, that's a really good point. Exactly that, because I could come and say, oh, I've got this idea and I've got $5,000 budget, but I want a website with 40 pages.
I'll build my house for $5,000 if you like.
Yeah, I'll have a go. Yeah, probably be a bit of a shed, but but it's exactly the same thing, isn't it? It's you know, where's the definable parameters of what you can get for that? It's a website is not a kind of one size fits all.
No.
And I think it's the amount of work and effort you've got to put in to make each page or each section have a purpose.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same with, you know, I want a 5-story house, but I've got $5,000. Well, a house is a house, but it's not, because a 5-story house is going to take you a lot longer to put up than a 2-story or a 1-story house. And it's similar to a website. You could have a very complicated site which needs a lot of design and a lot of consideration in it, which is going to cost you a lot more money than, say, a very simple website that, yes, we'd still love to do the design first on it, but we still need to go through those processes to get to that end point to then put that design together.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's just the way it needs to be. But I understand some people, you know, come to us with a preconceived idea of, let's just see something. What can you do? You're creatives. What can you create? But I think we are much better now standing by the principles of, if you want this to be effective, we need to do it in this order.
Yeah.
And the design is going to be much better for it.
Yeah, well, we're stickler for processes, you know, following proper processes, and the end result, like you said, it's going to be a much more effective website for you, because ultimately, I mean, it's got to build trust with your target audience. You know, and by doing that, using, you know, consistent brand colors, consistent typography, even style of imagery, the order of information, the hierarchy, and also just, you know, as we touched on several times, it's about the actual content itself and what needs to be, you know, relayed to your target audience. So all these things need to be considered, and without thinking about them properly, yes, you can use a templated system, and literally we've seen it numerous times where they're just literally swapping a logo out, they're swapping an image out for where the image is currently in place and things like that. And yes, okay, aesthetically it might still look okay, but is it going to achieve the end result that you want, which is more inquiries, you know, and also not just more inquiries, but ultimately, is it going to add to your ROI, return on investment, and is it going to set your stall out as looking different to your competitors? Because that's ultimately what it's about. If you don't stand out and they just then click onto the next website, one of your competitors, and they look the same as you, and then the next one does, then, you know, from the target audience perspective, it's like, well, which one should I choose? Because they all look the same to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some people don't appreciate what they're looking at and how good something is, which we've discussed on previous podcasts. It's that subliminal awareness. You see a nice brand, you know it's a good brand, even if you're not a designer, but you don't necessarily know why. And I think that's exactly the same with any sort of design, and that's web design very much included, that you could visit a website, you know when it looks good, you know what a good website looks like, but you don't always know why. You don't necessarily, if somebody asked you, if you're a non-designer or you don't know terms or phrasing or why something looks good, you couldn't necessarily give them direct kind of breakdown of why you think one site looks better than the other. But
No.
obviously we've gone into the processes and the principles behind it, so we know why, and you're receiving it as generally as a much better overall experience. And I think that's, you know, something, for example, someone like Apple's really good at, is creating something that overall is portrayed quite simple. And as a brand, they use a lot of white space. They're quite basic. They're quite simple in terms of the style. But everything they do has been very considered. It's very tidy. It's very aligned. The imagery is always on point.
It's really well polished, and everything they do, the image styles, everything, typography is just so well polished.
It is. But to someone that doesn't know design, they look at it and just go, oh, it looks like a lot of other sites, because they're not really appreciating the effort they've gone to. But actually, they are understanding that although it looks like a lot of other sites, the actual...
Like Samsung, you mean?
Yeah, like Samsung, yeah.
Probably.
Or like, any other kind of company that's in a similar space to them. But I think they do tend to push boundaries, and I think that's what I kind of just want to close on in terms of talking about core principles. Is it's important to push boundaries and do new things, which we're always looking to do, and create kind of, certainly within web design, do animations and do subtle animations and do things that are fun and engaging, that, like you said, the user hasn't seen before, or they can kind of get excited by or interested in.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a line between over designing and designing for your own ego, and doing something just because you think it looks good personally and you want to explore it and create it and do it on someone's site, over actually what you said earlier of, is that going to affect the ROI? Is it going to make that marketing tool, which is the website, actually market that business better with that fancy animation that scrolls across and blows an image up? For that industry, is that correct? Now we're talking about Apple. They've got that very difficult position of always looking at kind of to be seen as the forefront or almost ahead of what we're doing now. So they're going to want that kind of appearance of, we're doing this fancy thing and it's because it's the next movement forward, or this is available now in web technology, look how cool this is, look how this text blows up, look how this image. So they always want to be seen as a kind of tech savvy pioneer of what they're doing. But is that going to be the same for, say, a local business or a smaller company or a business that deals with construction, like you said earlier? Do their audience need to have that reassurance from them to buy their product? No.
Well, it's also, I mean, sorry to interrupt there, but it's also, it's the delivery, isn't it, or the way into finding that website. You know, a lot of people that obviously want or go onto the Apple site, specifically go onto the Apple site because they know the brand, because of all the marketing in the background. You see it everywhere on 100%. TV, on socials, and just everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Whereas like your local business, they haven't got that luxury of a TV ad and, you know, billboard posters all over the place and all that. No. So it's, you know, the route into that website is very different. So this is where like animations and things like that, putting a load of video content, depends how the webs or the video is delivered.
Yeah.
Well, we can touch on that in a sec, but depending on how that's delivered, it can slow down, you know, the web page speed, the load speed, which could be detrimental, you know, for you being found in a Google search, for instance. So whereas, you know, Apple, they could stick 1,000 videos on there, but because people specifically want to go to their website to look at their products, you know, it doesn't matter about the SEO value, because, you know, if you keyed in, I don't know, desktop computer manufacturer, I can't imagine you ever would to find Apple, but if you did, they'd still come up there pretty high, I would imagine.
Yeah, they would.
But that's not the reason why people are going to their website. They know of the brand and the product. They've seen the advertising everywhere.
Yeah.
So they're going to specifically key in, you know, apple.co.uk or whatever to get there. Whereas, as I say, the local business won't do that. So when we're talking about animation and things like that, you've got to be very careful. You don't, you know, stick a load of video content in there, a load of animations and everything kind of zooming in left and right on your site, because potentially it could slow your webpage down.
It could.
And can harm people. Your SEO value.
Yeah. And it could irritate people. Like there's certain people that aren't, like we said, when you've got to consider accessibility, which is really important in web design, whether you like it or not, you've got to accept some people don't like animation and it throws them off, and the movement.
Like .gov.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like
Just black and white
sites.
text.
Yeah, that's the other end of the spectrum. Yeah,
Yeah.
like we don't do any sort of creativity or design, but yeah, I think it's like you say, it's being realistic of as a designer, you want to be as creative and as innovative as you can. And
Yeah,
I
of
think
course.
Apple have got the fortunate ability of being able to get away with that, and probably people expect that from them as well. So when you're on the site, you don't want to see a bland, scrollable page. They've got that ability now. They're so recognised, they can do that. But whether somebody that's not in that kind of industry requires that, I think is the point I'm trying to make, is very negligible. Because yes, okay, you scroll down, an image zooms in and it enlarges and it comes across. It's engaging, it catches your attention, you like it, but the actual core underlying value that you add to that brand, what have they said, where's the proof of what they do, why do you trust them, why do you buy into them? I think the point being from that point of view is that doesn't really change if you throw loads of animations into the site. You're still not going to have any better impression of that brand because the images come in from the side and blown
You might
up.
say they're quite cool, though.
They might say they're quite cool, yeah. They might look at them and think, yeah, the site's quite funky. But I think the site technically is a different medium to the business.
Yeah.
So you can't just go, oh, because the site's working well and it looks great, the images fly in. And now the quality and the service and everything about the business is so much more trustworthy because of the animation. I think they're going to want to see evidence. They're going to want to see well-written copy. They're going to want to see testimonials. They're going to want to see that kind of factual evidence that the business itself is sound.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, Apple don't need that. They've got that. They've done it. So they can do as much animation as they want.
Yeah.
As a creative agency like ourselves, we've got to be looking like we're adding that to our site. And I think that adds benefit to what we do because we're a creative agency. So people are going to expect creativity, some slightly untoward things, some unusual things that adds and helps our industry. But I think it's got to be judged based on how much value it's adding to the actual client. And like we said, there will be some elements, little arrows and movements and subtle sort of marqueing text which scrolls across the page. Sometimes that can really enhance someone's engagement because it draws attention to something more effectively than something that's static. And that's very different. But I think what I'm trying to say is it's the ego side of sometimes with designers, which we're guilty of, is we see something that's quite cool or we want to do it and we forget that actually it's the client that comes first and their message and their business, and then we have to take a step back and say, right, is it right for them? Or do we,
I'd say we got better at that over the years because
absolutely.
I mean, when these new tools come out, you're excited about certain new tools and new systems and page builders and the like, and oh, I'd love to use that, and we try it out, but then ultimately, you reflect on it, like you say, is it right for this client and for their target audience? Well, actually, no, it probably isn't. So, but we've got, as I say, much better at that. So,
agreed.
By doing a discovery session, that really does help gaining as much information, how it needs to be delivered, and whether it should include some sort of bells and whistles, if you like. And some clients it will, and some clients it won't.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then how much of that? Yeah, I think that's summarised that principles really well. So if we move on to design systems and consistency in design, I think that's applicable across all forms of design. It's definitely not just web design focused, but I think in a website there's obviously going to be certain things we'd look for to see design consistency, like there would be in a brochure or a poster or an advert, and I think it adds to the professionalism of the whole overall impact of the website and how people judge you, even if you don't fully understand. Again, like we said earlier, that's what you're seeing. You can tell when a title's misaligned or it's a different size, different font, different color, the spacing looks off. Some text is butted up against the title and it isn't further down.
Different fonts, we see that all the time.
Different fonts across the site, crazy. Which is crazy. There's no consistency there to what you're actually seeing. And I think it's like looking at the messaging that portrays about your brand. It's the housekeeping of how people are seeing. If you're sloppy and you've not considered that on your website, how does that reflect your actual business? And again, not everyone's going to be looking at it as analytically as we would, but they can still tell when one is really well polished, really well designed, and one isn't. And I think that's where we come in because we know all the intricacies, but the overall look and feel is going to have that impact on somebody.
But this can relay back to, I mean, obviously we're we are, creative and marketing agency. That's the fundamentals of what we do. But branding is a big part of what we do. So we think strategically about the brand and how that brand should be conveyed across all mediums. So, print and, out of home, billboards, and even tone of voice on radio and TV ads and things like that we do for our clients. And a website is just a part of that whole brand look and feel. And I think all too often, quite often we will see maybe a client's gone to a web agency and they're purely focused on creating a great look and feel for that website, but haven't taken into account sometimes the other brand collateral, the press advertising, the out-of-home advertising, or whatever it might be. So sometimes we see websites that look overtly different to the rest of the brand. So this is why we said right at the very beginning, consistency is key. It helps build trust. The end user knows who they're dealing with. The tone of voice needs to be the same and consistent throughout. So ensuring that the website is not a standalone item, it's part of the overall brand.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's a really good point. Like we said at the beginning of the podcast, it's a reflection of your brand and your image, and I think it needs to be in line with everything else you're doing. So we're not just saying the only important part of your brand is your website. This is just obviously the fact this podcast is focused on web design. We're covering that more than anything else. But your social media, your print collateral, everything you're sharing via sort of magazines or video content or anything on YouTube, it all needs to be in line with your website. It all needs to be completely on the same page and the same level of quality. If something is of a lower quality, it's going to drag everything else down. And too often it's because people cheap out on considering those elements in their website, and they just see it as a sort of tick box exercise. Got a website, tick. But actually they're not thinking a bit about, why do I need it? What's it for? What can it do for me? And I think that's where a design of it also enhances your overall brand and your look and feel. And you've got to make sure that the design is consistent. So with all our websites, we'd use a design framework. So that would ensure that all the spacing, your text, your fonts, your colors, they're all set up from the beginning. They all match your branding, and everything on your site is going to look consistent. And I think that's what often is missing. Even when you say about templating, it's people taking on a template and not really understanding the importance of why that template then needs to look consistent and how to edit the template to make it look on brand with what you need it to look like, but also maintain that consistency and make sure that all the spacing is the same. And we come across it so often where, so many agencies just knock up a website and they don't consider all these elements. They don't think about the purpose of it, but they make it look passable as a design. But every element and every section and every color is individually put onto the website, which means there's no consistency there at all. And you've got to remember everything. You've got to remember all the numbers of the spacing. You've got to remember all the references of the colors, and everything's so individual that also when that client then wants to make an update to the site, it's very difficult for them to do it because they need to know all those values as well and all those principles. So we would create the structure and the templating of the website in a way that it's very consistent to give the client that peace of mind that when they update the content and the copy and the imagery, that they're not having to worry about it looking inconsistent.
So, I mean, you're setting up like headlines and things like that. So you set a style for the headlines, the H1 headline bits of information, and so on, the subheadings, the body text, it's all consistent. And we set that up right at the very beginning, almost like a part of a style guide, if you like a brand guideline, a style sheet. And then thereafter, every headline will use the same font, every subheading will use the same font, and so on, so that you've got this brand consistency, look and feel throughout the site. But you spent the time up front putting all the information into the style sheet initially, all the brand colors, everything, even the spacing and the leading and the kerning and everything.
Because clients don't want to be involved with that. It's not their area of expertise, and it actually makes them nervous if they value the importance of design, which a lot of our clients do, if not all of them. Once we've had a conversation with them, they will openly say, I don't want to be worried about that. That's what we've used you guys for. I don't want to be involved in making sure the spacing's right, or making sure the size is right of a heading, or I've chosen the right font or the colour. That's not their area of expertise and not something they're comfortable in doing, and why they've come to us. So it's our job to make sure that we can do that for them, and ensure that if they do want to update content or text or imagery or whatever it might be, that we've put as best measure in as possible to stop that from happening. But too often it's we see it all the time on websites where they're just not considered. They're not considered to be scaled. They're not dynamically built, so they've not got that kind of structure in place where when a client wants to go and change the content, the web design, the overall look and feel needs to be protected in a way. Otherwise, the professionalism, like we've spoke about throughout the whole of this podcast, can be compromised by no reason in themselves in terms of how they thought they were adding content or how they thought they were adding an image. They didn't intend to do it, but suddenly things start falling apart. And like we've said, drift as well. So if we work with councils or bigger agencies and they change staff members and they've been in editing content or changing content, that design can drift over time and have a real negative impact on the business. Yeah, brand creep, exactly. And it's no different from sharing, like somebody would share if they came to us and they wanted us to design a Word document, which we would love to do, obviously, because we love using Word.
No, we don't.
But if it was something a bit more, even InDesign, for example, if we then share that document with the client, the minute we share it with them, it's that trust element of who's going to be editing it. Do they know what they're doing? Is that going to reflect your brand properly? And I think it's exactly the same with the website. So many agencies just give clients full control over everything once they've done it.
Yep.
And it's that overall impact of the web design of how professional does your website look over time.
And it's also how much do you value your time? Because sometimes it's far quicker for us to go in and make a quick change than it is for you to go into the back end and trying to work out where you're meant to be and where that page is or where that element is and how to change it. We could do it maybe sometimes, 5-10 minutes, job done. Okay, you need to pay for our time, but if you value your time, there's still a monetary value to your time. So it usually makes more sense and is financially makes more sense if you get us to make the changes.
That's very true, because we would, as long as the website's built correctly in the first place, which like we've discussed very often isn't, then these design changes and these content updates are very simple to perform because the site's been built in the correct way. So the time that it takes us is a lot less than, say, another agency that's built it in a non-scalable, non-dynamic, non-framework concept, where they're having to go in and do all this manually, and each time which designer's doing that change for you in that agency, and do they know what the original person did when they built the site? Do they know what the color systems are? Do they know all the hex reference? So it's all those things that could go wrong, and we see them go wrong all the time. Do they remember exactly what the padding value is? And then also when you're on a mobile device, like we spoke about earlier, what happens to the headings, what happens to the colors, the images? And again, with a framework, we've got that in place. So the person that's making those updates doesn't need to worry about that. They're just concerned about the content, the colours, and the imagery. And all of that's been put into the framework for them.
Sorry about that. Slamming door.
Don't think we upset anyone. It was just a slamming door.
So, I mean, talking about then the processes, if we just recap. So you got the discovery session. Which then feeds into the UX design. So you're looking at this overall structure, building wireframes, what needs to go where. So you've done that element. I mean, generally, how would you just, tell our audience kind of how would you generally do a wireframe and that UX bit? Is there certain bits of software or could you, literally just draw it out, or
you could. I mean, it's really how long's a piece of string in sense of what
100
works.
inches.
100 inches.
I did that once.
101 sometimes.
I bought a reel of string,
and you measured it,
and it was exactly 100 inches.
That's quite
so there you go.
There, that's quite a reflection of your personality. Measuring a piece of string. It's a really good question, actually. The answer is, however, it's a functional, content-led process. So, however works for you. much like we do with, you know, a lot of things in house where we find it easier to use pen and paper or write on a notebook. There's plenty of systems out there you could use, but the bottom line is it's the content that's important. But for us, we want to obviously allow clients to be able to engage with it and share it. So we would usually use a tool like Figma, where I'd use a wireframe based layout. So I'd give the client, which is also a really interesting point you brought up there, that there would generally be no sort of styles attributed to the wireframe phase or the UX phase, because we don't want to distract with that design phase. So we try and keep fonts, colors, actual elements, layouts to a minimum, so that we're letting the client just focus on, right, this section needs to have a title, a call to action, some text and an image somewhere. Don't know where it's going to be or how it's going to be laid out, but there's going to be an image and it's going to work with that. Right, the next section, you need to have 3 areas of content. Again, I think there should be an image with each area. There should be a title, some text. Maybe we add a call to action. If you want 6 sections and we've only designed for 3, maybe we consider a kind of scrolling element. So we'd show the client in the wireframe, we're going to create a scrolling element. So that's how that's going to work. That's about the extent to what they're going to see in terms of that wireframe phase, so that we don't distract too much and get too many questions coming up with, oh, why is that colour in there? And I'm not sure about this font size, and that image doesn't look quite right on that. So what we want to do with that phase is make sure that the content, like we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, is nailed, and the structure and the flow and the elements we need to involve are all in place. So that would be the wireframe. Then we'd allow the client 99% of the time to see that, comment on it, allow feedback, give us the kind of ability to kind of make changes and tweak things if we need to then move that on to the more design based, which is kind of what this podcast is about, but the UI phase, which is the user interface. So the more design based phase, where we then can get a bit more creative and we can look at, right, how can we make this section look how
Actually,
we want it to
there's
look.
one thing that happens during that process as well. Once the UX bit's been kind of signed off by the client, you know, we're at a stage then where we know what the content needs to be. So, you know, as Rob just touched on, we're going to then look at the design process. But in amongst that, the website needs some imagery or some video.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's a crucial point in time where we can say to a client, you know, a lot of our clients want us to, you know, handle the photography and things like that. Some don't, but at least then we know what content needs to go in there, imagery wise, or video content, or both. And we can either, you know, see what images they've already got in their image library, or we can, you know, commission a photographer or videographer to actually specifically go out there and, you know, capture the content for the pages, because we know what it needs to convey. And, you know, during this whole process, even in the discovery phase, we can talk to them and even show them, you know, styles of imagery that initially we were thinking about and those type of things. So this comes back to like the style sheet that we spoke about in the UX phase, and you know, understanding like how it's going to be constructed. Is the style of imagery is really important. So that can be happening whilst we're kind of doing the design phase, because, you know, the photographers can go out and do all their bit, or videographers, or both, whilst we're kind of building the site from a design perspective.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the imagery is a very strong consideration, which I suppose we haven't discussed a whole lot on this podcast about the design element, but it is really important, because quite often, as you've just said, the video and the image content is a very engaging part of the website.
Yeah.
And if that's not up to par with where we need it to be for the brand, or the quality of the imagery is not where it needs to be, then that can have a very negative effect on the overall website, no matter how good your design is. You can have the most fancy, laid out, animated, you know, all frills kind of website, and then if you start looking at some of the images and they look a bit pixelated, or they're not well shot, or they're obviously stock images throughout the site, you're obviously going to start judging that site and putting together an opinion of it, and it's not going to be very positive.
No, it's brand trust, isn't it? I mean, this is what we touched on numerous times throughout this podcast, is that brand trust. And like you said, if it's stock imagery in particular, you know, we've seen it. I mean, we do a lot of work with fostering agencies, let's say, and the amount of times we've seen, not on the sites that we do, because we tend to have specialist photo shoots for that, but we do see it quite often where they're using the same image on lots of different fostering sites.
Yeah, a lot.
So being mindful of that and making sure that you're building trust with your target audience. And the best way to do that is to have unique imagery, photography or video
Yeah.
that is aligned to your brand.
Yeah, I completely agree. So if we sum up then with some final tips on things to kind of consider with web design. Obviously we've covered a lot and we've covered a lot of elements, but the one thing we probably haven't mentioned yet is kind of navigational elements, so the menu side of web design. And again, we see overly complex menus on some websites, menus that aren't accessible. So what that means is essentially, like we said earlier, if you've got some sort of impairment, so you can't see correctly, or you know your hearing's not what it needs to be, although hearing isn't generally a problem on websites other than being able to hear videos, and considering someone might need captions and things like that for videos. Generally it's like kind of physical issues with being able to use mice or visual impairments. So you need to make sure that if you've got voiceover or you're using a keyboard, that the website is navigable. And too often with very complex menus, there's two issues. One, that hasn't been considered for accessibility, and two, it's just too complicated. And that's the reason a lot of people are kind of against what's referred to as a mega menu in a website, which is generally, you've probably seen it when you hover over an option, you'll have like a full screen menu drop down appear, and it will have things like
not always
imagery.
full screen though, does it? Sometimes it only drops down a little bit.
Yeah, not always full screen, but it usually fills at least the width of the website. They're quite often full screen, but they can, you're right, they can fill the width of the website as well. And they're usually like column based. They've got images in there, they've got loads of links, subheadings, things like that.
Well, they're almost a website in themselves, aren't they?
Sometimes they can be.
Some of the ones we've seen have got images and animations and all sorts
in them. Yeah, and I think when the audience is correct for them, we've used them with some of our fostering websites. When the navigation's kept simple and it's still accessible and you can still navigate and scroll through with the keyboard, there's nothing wrong with them. They can still work. But I think the important thing to consider with them is, do you need one? And quite a few clients will jump straight to wanting one without really thinking about, do we need all those links in there? Is that easy for someone to navigate through, and can they find where they're trying to go?
Yeah.
And I think that's the question I would usually ask when we're testing a website is, can you get to where you need to get to? Is the navigation simple enough, or is it overcomplicated? And do you need all those images in there? And do you need any sort of, like you were just saying, Paul, do you need video content in a mega menu? And I think quite often people overcomplicate the navigation, and the purpose of the navigation on a website is to get somebody as quickly with as little clicks as possible to where they need to go.
Yep.
And I think the pitfall with a mega menu is that you can add too many links. You can create a very complex navigation when actually all someone needs is to get to the place they need to get to quite quickly.
Yeah.
And adding lots of sublinks and images, it just creates barriers for someone finding where they need to be. So general sort of best practice, best tips in terms of menus for web design is try and consider the audience, consider what they're looking for, and keep it simple if you can. That's not to say that all menus have to be boring, but at the same time, if you're adding images, then there's got to be some rationale behind it as to why you think that would benefit somebody.
It's also it's the terminology used, that sometimes you see menus and they got words on there that you think, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Should I be clicking on that bit, or should I be clicking on that bit there?
Yeah. And if you spend more than 10-20 seconds thinking about that, how long are you going to be before you're off the website and looking at someone else's?
Exactly, yeah.
Because you think, well, I can't find what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And it's something very small to a lot of people that, it's just a menu, but actually it has a big impact on how long someone stays on your website. Not to mention the difficulty with the mega menu on mobile, because obviously if the menu, when it's got 4 columns on a desktop across your screen, it's difficult to digest. What do you think it's going to be like when it's on a mobile in a single column and you've got to read through all the items that you're trying to get to?
Quite.
It becomes infinitely more complicated. So often, like Paul was alluding to earlier, mobile first design can help to think what's the absolute essentials that someone would need on a mobile to get to where you need them to go. And I think that can be a really good sort of way of judging.
From a design perspective, I mean, that's a good discipline, really. If it's mobile first, like you said, it really does, cut the wheat from the chaff, really.
Does.
That you need to refine everything and make sure that in very simplistic terms.
Yeah.
And there's one thing we're not really touched on yet, but sometimes even on a mobile device, you might want to reduce the amount of content that's on a mobile viewed website. So you might not want to display the animations
No.
and videos and things like that,
No.
and literally just keep it a lot more simplistic.
Yeah, no, you're right. Just keep it for a desktop because, like you said earlier, somebody that's on a desktop is going to value that engagement much more. The animation might have more value to them. They might be more ready to see a kind of full width, larger imagery, more engaging imagery. But on a mobile, it might irritate them because it's a smaller device.
Yeah.
They don't want to see all that. They just want to see the content and read what they need to read.
Yeah, quite.
And that's a really big thing to consider. And that's, I think, what can separate, a very effective website from one that's not been thought through.
Yep.
So that's a really good point. And then obviously we touched on contrast. Contrast is a really big issue from an accessibility point of view. If people struggle to read the text or they can't see what you've got on there, we see it all the time. Or people put text over imagery and they throw gradients on that aren't really right, and the image is still really busy behind the text. It's really hard to read the text. You're not going to really engage with it very much. So again, you could lose that person from something quite straightforward, like just getting that wrong.
And that doesn't just apply for accessibility, people with, sight issues.
No,
it
doesn't,
just,
no.
It just applies to people just generally that,
It could
if
irritate
it's
them.
got to be clear and easy to read.
Agree.
And if it's not, we see quite often like text overlaid onto, similar color backgrounds and things like that. And it's very hard to distinguish what that text says.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something as the tip, I'd say that's something definitely to avoid. It's considering how you can say things simpler rather than trying to kind of shoot something into a space or an image or put it over an image when really it's not going to have any sort of positive impact. You might have ticked the box again, like we said earlier, of putting the text in there and getting your description. But if no one's reading it or they can't see it, why is it in there? And I think that's again going back to that point before of how valuable is it just to tick a box. And again, on the web design principles, quite often we see what we call like a lazy design process where you'd paste a load of text in a page or something, or you'd have bullet points, or you just have, it's not a very designed section, it's just lots of text with bullet points, and it's very hard for someone to engage with. It's not broken up and it's not considered. And again, I would say it's much better to kind of pull things out of that text and make them smaller but more digestible, more engageable, than have something that's just a waffle of content that people aren't reading.
Well, it's just like I touched on earlier. Imagine it's an ad. Every page is an ad.
Yeah.
So what's the key piece of information that they need to read?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a headline of some sort that is going to describe roughly what the page is all about, more attention grabbing. Then there's going to be a subheading, might be a bit more of a descriptor, and then some body text. But the body text doesn't need to be, 10,000 words.
No.
Because, okay, and we touched on this earlier as well, if you're a science-led type business, let's say, and you do want to have a lot more information, then that's where it can be delivered in a downloadable document.
Yeah, of course.
Or it could be, just a little snippet of what that content is with a read more button.
Yeah.
And then a drop down.
Not everyone needs to see the full amount of text.
Exactly. Because fundamentally, from an aesthetic perspective, we as humans don't want to look at a page with War and Peace on it.
No.
It just won't work. We'll just switch off. We'll click on the next page or even on another website.
Especially nowadays, because people's attention span is very, very limited. So it's very difficult to get somebody to... Yeah. I thought I saw one as well, actually. I think he's on the windowsill over there. It's very difficult to get people to focus on something and stay focused on something, especially with websites when there's so much choice out there. And now, obviously, again, in another podcast, we'll be sort of touching on AI and things and how that's affecting websites and search. But now with that coming in as well, and there's this whole conversational requirement for a website with AI so that your website can have content that's conversational. So when the AI can ask you, is this what you're looking for?
Yeah.
You can have a conversation with it. I think the more of that we're getting and the quicker people are seeing results, the more they're less likely to want to read just reams of text on a page.
Yeah.
And I say it just comes across quite lazy as a design point of view because it's easier to paste blocks of text in and just leave it as blocks of text than it is to actually think about what's really important in there, what images need to go with it, how do we reset that takes time and effort, and not everyone's put that into their site. And I think that's what shows for sites that have spent a bit more time to pull out what the user really needs to know about you, and hence why we've discussed doing the discovery sessions and getting those answers, because that leads on to much better design overall. And I think that's what I'd finish on in terms of the things to avoid, the benefits of spending time and doing that properly.
Agreed.
Cool. Okay, well, I think that wraps that up. So thanks for listening to us ramble about web design for over an hour. And we'll catch you on the next podcast. Thanks, guys.
As one quick aside, if you are watching us on the YouTube channel, then please subscribe, like the video, and connect with us on socials. Until the next time, thank you very much.
Thanks. Cheers. Guys. Like and subscribe. Cheer Paul up and make him smile.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.